I came across something that Aurobindo says, that humanity is not the last rung of terrestrial evolution. Evolution continues. And for me, it was like, wow.
Imagine a spiritual path where one doesn't just aim at the liberation of one's being, but rather proactively embraces all of life as yoga.
Our invocation today is this place that Auroville is meant to be, a shelter for an eternal youth. That a youth that doesn't matter whether you're 90 or 9, but that you have a sense of progress and that you have a sense of wonder.
We meet with Deepti Tewari, the principal of the last school of Auroville, somebody who has been on this path for more than 5 decades. What does it mean to live one's entire life as yoga?
A very warm welcome. I'd like to begin with just sharing that how inspired I am through your journey. I remember about 10 years ago meeting you, and 2-3 things that really brought a radiance in my eyes was when I saw you talk about Sri Aurobindo's yoga. And one part of me saw myself in you a little bit as to how my life can look like. And you were so full of energy and enthusiasm for building something very beautiful. We'll, in today's conversation, explore what is Sri Aurobindo's yoga that brings such a sparkle in your eye. What is this work that you're doing for Auroville that brings such an enthusiasm for you? But before we come to that, I wanted our audience to know a little bit about your journey. How did you choose this path? Also, by the looks of it, you're not somebody who looks outwardly how we see a spiritual person in India. And yet, spirituality is the absolute cornerstone basis, the most important living, breathing thing in your life. So how did you come on this path? What was your journey and why this path amongst so many different paths that you could have taken? And then we'll dive into Sri Aurobindo's yoga and Auroville. But first, just a little bit about you.
Okay, so, to speak about the present human person that I am, recognizing that one has lived thousands of times, what the Indian idea, punarapi janamam, punarapi maranam. So in a sense, this particular life is not necessarily the most important, but as you're asking me to talk about it. Okay, so I was born into a family, a Punjabi Kashmiri family that had a very strong connection to the armed forces of India. Both my parents were in the armed forces, my grandfather, my uncles. And so I think from birth, childhood, the idea of India and her security and her future was a dominant theme in my life. My mother's elder brother died in Kashmir the day when the partition of India took place. There was a problem in Kashmir. It was the first battle that Free India was fighting, and my uncle, who had a broken arm, he saved Kashmir. He got the Paramveer Chakra and died doing it. And so my father was profoundly affected by that. And I think we are so influenced by what our parents go through. So they came together after my uncle had died. And my grandfather was also a seeker. He's written a book that is still being sold by the Shivananda ashram. He and Swami Sivananda were good friends. And so he became part of the medical mission. Swami Sivananda was also a doctor. So was my grandfather. Though my grandfather was a general in the British Indian Army, he was so profoundly affected by the death of his eldest son. He's written a book that is still being sold. He went around India and it's a book called The Saints and Mystics of India. And so why I'm saying that is, I grew up in a situation where the living spirituality of India was present. The people from when my mother was pregnant with me, she was constantly in Swami Sivananda's context. There are photographs of me as a little baby with Swami Sivananda. Somehow there was a kind of a blessing that surrounded Swami Ramdas, Swami Sivananda.
It's like all of the family's aspiration was kind of preparing.
I would say that there was something that was very alive.
Yeah.
But as I was growing up, it was beautiful. One of my grandfather's dearest friends had been part of the INA, and he had become a sannyasi. He had been put into prison under death sentence by the British, and then when India became free, he became a sannyasi. So Swamiji was in our house all the time. Lovely man. We all loved him as kids. But I would listen. My grandfather and grandmother had arti every day. Subhe Sham. There was always arti. We kids were allowed to join, not allowed to join. But we loved it. When we were around in their house, arti took place. So there was all this, the music, the tradition, but very unsatisfactory. Because I would ask Swamiji, I was a teenager, I was a little girl, and he would say that the solution is to abandon this earth. The solution is nirvana, moksha. That's what all of them, that was the aim. Even the living spirituality of India, Swami Sivananda and Anandamayi Ma, there was a connection with the family also. They all see abandonment of manifestation as the solution. That, even though humanism, these new teachers who came in the last century brought in humanism. So we were influenced to that extent. India was influenced by the Western ideas. So humanism had become a very powerful presence, and all of these institutions, situations were taking care as much as possible of people around them. But the solution is abandon life. In 1962, my father was captured by the Chinese on the first day of that war. We didn't know if he was alive or dead for 3 months. My mother joined the army, and I was packed off as a 7-year-old to a boarding school. So that also, when I look at it, as a 7-year-old in a boarding school, it makes you independent. You learn to be alone with yourself. But the school I went to, which was a wonderful school up in the mountains, had at least 40% of people from the armed forces. They had a special door open. And so many of the people I grew up with had lost fathers in the 62 operation, in the 65 operation. So somehow we lived in a situation where the wars. So I was old enough for the 62 operation. Then there was a war in 65. My father came back with clearly some PTSD, which was not recognized. Now we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. My father had to deal with it on his own, with the help of my mother. So we were growing up in this context where India and her future, there was a passionate commitment towards it, and yet the spirituality was all about abandonment. Then my father was involved in the 70, the war which gave birth to Bangladesh. And then it turns out that all the senior officers of Eastern Command had blessing packets from the mother. And it's a very interesting combination. General Jagjit Singh Arora was a Sardar. His chief of staff, General Jacob, was a Jew. Then there were lots of Hindus and Muslims who were slightly at the next level. So this operation from the Indian side was representative of all types of people. Anyway, my father had a very powerful experience. So he was the first to ask for leave. I had just finished those days, senior Cambridge. So I had just finished senior Cambridge and the war had started. I came home, parents had no time. My mother was in charge of the prisoner ward. So these two were not at home. We just had to manage ourselves. The war ended miraculously. So actually, when you look back and you say, how is it possible that a standing army could surrender? General Niazi was asked, why did you surrender? He said, I thought it was hopeless. But it was a standing army. It was fully armed. It had no reason to surrender. So there was something at work.
Right.
When I came home, I found on the table a little booklet, and this is East Pakistan still, Aurobindo and Bangladesh. There is no Bangladesh. This is a booklet that was written by Supreme on the request of Mother. And 20,000 copies were printed and they were circulated all over India. My father ended up with a copy also. And I read that book because I'm very interested in these topics. And I could not believe that a spiritual teacher could have such a incisive, percipient perspective on India's security. So that kind of was the first contact with Aurobindo, because, you know, we grew up in India with not much about Aurobindo. The Alipur jail case, that's it. We were given a dose of many of the others. In fact, the father of the nation is what is spoken about, nothing else. Aurobindo is dismissed as one of the extremists. So yes, I had heard of him, but no, I had not heard of him. Really not heard of him. So Dad got leave, specially, and he brought the whole family. Extraordinary, we landed in Pondi in 1972 without knowing that it was Aurobindo's centenary. We landed just 2 days before Mother's birthday. And the inauguration of Matri Mandir. So we were here for the foundation stone of Matri Mandir. And my first contact with Mother was when she came on the balcony. I was, suspicious, questioning, reactive, 16-year-old. But what I remember about that moment is the whole street is full, packed with people. And suddenly when this bird-like being appears, she's so tiny. And she comes on the balcony, and there is such a silence that descends. I have never experienced that kind of silence. And everyone's looking at her. So that was very striking. So the first contact with Aurobindo in Bangladesh, then Mother on the balcony. She gave a special darshan to the family on the 22nd of February. Because my father was coming from the Bangladesh operation, because she was very, very concerned and interested about the army, she always said, support the Indian Army. It's really one of the best institutions that India has. She says that many times in the agenda. She even says that to Indira Gandhi. So 5 of us, and that room, something happened to all of us. Something took place when each of us sat at her feet. It's not possible to describe, but we all landed up here. And as I was the oldest, my little sister was only 6. Parents were still in the army. They had not retired. I made a trip on my own. So on my 3rd visit, so we came with the family in 72. I came alone across the country. My father was by then in Kashmir. And I would get into a train, come all the way across. There was a friend in Pondi who took care of my arrival and all that. But I stayed in one of the ashram guest houses, and I absolutely... In that first visit, I came across something that Aurobindo says, that humanity is not the last rung of terrestrial evolution. Evolution continues. And for me, it was like, wow, everything aligned itself. All these bits and pieces of divided thought realigned completely. We were there in February. I asked Kirit Bhai, who was the registrar, can I join the ashram school? But they normally only have admissions in November. So he says, not possible now, and I will get back to you. By the time he got back to me, I had changed my mind. I didn't want to study in the ashram school by that time. And I'm so glad I didn't. I came on my own. And I realized that somehow the kind of person I am, I need to make my own journey. I don't need to be told what to do. I need to find it from within me. And the other thing that Aurobindo says is that the first principle of teaching is that nothing can be taught. And I went to my parents, I said, I've been trying to say this to you all my life, you know. It has to be brought forward. So everything that I came across of Mother and Aurobindo, just as if I was dazzled that somebody had put it into words.
Yeah. I'm going to pause you a little bit. There are many points when you shared, I was extremely curious to know more. But I think I'm going to pick and choose a few to kind of go deeper into. You mentioned that spirituality, even though it was living, it was talking abandonment. And then at several junctures, you mentioned whether Sri Aurobindo in Bangladesh as a spiritual figure, very accurately, very precisely being able to talk about India's security. If you can, and also you mentioned that humanity is not the final rung of evolution, that there is a step beyond. For a lay person who does not know yet the magic of Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo's yoga, if you can share like 3 to 4 ideas, insights that you had early on that, really, I can hear that you were really like, in simple words, blown away.
Yeah.
But what were some of those nuggets that, of course, the presence of the mother, but if one has to put it in terms of knowledge, in terms of understanding, why Sri Aurobindo's yoga? What was it about it that was like, this is the path?
See, I discovered many things as I went along. So now I'm looking back, and with hindsight, one is informed by everything. The yoga of Sri Aurobindo is evolutionary. It recognizes that what science, the Darwinian idea of evolution, which basically focuses on forms. So from the amoeba and the protozoa, nature has evolved this being that we call Homo sapiens. Yes, they tell you the process, but they don't tell you why. Now, Sri Aurobindo tells you that the evolution of forms is merely a container for the evolution of consciousness. Now, that is completely aligning many truths on different planes of consciousness. So this idea that Sri Aurobindo's yoga is evolutionary in nature. Integral yoga is an evolutionary yoga. It recognizes that humanity doesn't stop as the Homo sapiens, this thinking, self-aware, self-conscious being. Something else is needed. Now, this idea has been present in human thought, but it's always been taken form in a weird, distorted manner. We are emerging from the Second World War, where you have these ideas of the Nazis, where they see themselves as somehow the Übermensch, and then there are a whole bunch of people that are Untermensch, that's kind of subhuman, to be exploited. That's a bit frightening. So I grew up with a great interest in the 20th century. I read so much, and nothing made sense, the why of it. And when you come across Sri Aurobindo's explanation, even his explanation of what seems to be evil and falsehood, I mean, when you care about this beautiful manifestation, then you say, why so much of darkness? Why so much of destructive falsehood? What is wrong with human consciousness? Now, I grew up with all those stories of the Asuras and the Devas and all that, but nothing had fallen into place. The thing that was the key for me was not only is somebody saying that there is an intention, there is a purpose, you just have to understand it, find a way to put it in the right place, but he's presented this argument in the most marvelous formulation. If you want to understand why, the life divine, if you want to understand how, the synthesis, and if you want to just experience the beauty of what he's saying, which he recommends, is Savitri. So as a 16-year-old, I walked off with Savitri. I didn't start to read about Aurobindo till I was in my 20s. So from 16 till the time I came to stay, and actually my first contact was with Mother's books. Because when I came to stay, they were preparing Mother's birth centenary library. And so in the ashram, they have such a strict way of proofreading. You seldom find mistakes in the publications of the ashram because there are about 8 people who proofread it. It goes from one proofreader to the other. So some of these elderly ladies who were doing the proofreading, they would get me to come and read to them so that they could correct it. So I would be reading. As a result, I came into contact many of the explanations that Mother gives, because in some ways Mother is a simple but pristine translation of what Aurobindo is saying. So actually my first contact was through Savitri and through Mother's words. I really began to read Aurobindo when I was slightly older. But the fact that those books are there, and if you have questions, you can find answers. So Aurobindo presents you with a very cogent, organized, methodized process by which you can arrive at a lived experience of what the purpose of manifestation is. And I don't understand why India has truly not discovered him yet. Because the way we are discovering him today in India is kind of in this, some sort of a, like everyone else. He's like nobody who ever existed. He's the future coming into the present.
I wanted to illustrate on a couple of points that you mentioned in passing. One was the explanation about what is evil. How do you feel the traditional society vis-a-vis traditional spirituality, vis-a-vis Aurobindo spirituality, explains the question of what is undivine, what is evil, what is asuric?
It's actually all a question of interpretation, because I think if you read the stories in one way, you can arrive at some of the ideas that Aurobindo is saying. But if you read them in another way, then the only solution is nirvana and moksha. Even, for instance, the story of the churning of the ocean, which is where the Amrit comes out. But first, the first thing that comes out is hal hala, and then Shiva has to swallow it, and he keeps it in his throat.
So somewhere even behind these stories, at a deeper interpretation, one can find Aurobindo's yoga.
Absolutely.
Right.
So Aurobindo says, my yoga is Vedantic in principle. So, but his Vedanta is the original Vedanta. It's not the darshanas. It's not where the duality comes in. The thing is, Aurobindo just gives the right place to most of the situation. So your question, why evil? Oh, that's a very big question. But still, Aurobindo accepts the idea that we live in a sevenfold world. And that, the one, has bodied forth into the many. So you start with Sat, Chitananda, Vijnana, then you have Manas, Prana, Annam, and then you have, the Veda says, the complete darkness, an ocean of darkness. So this thing that came down went almost to the opposite. Evolution, it's interesting, in a traditional Indian sense, there is this argument that growth and progress can only take place in a physical body. The Veda says, Shariram khalu dharma sadhanam. It is only in the body that you can make progress. If the gods want to make progress, they have to take a body. Because this body is evolutionary in nature. The gods are typal beings. Now, we'd have to make sense of what is the difference between a typal entity and an evolutionary entity. In this evolutionary world, there is one key presence which is not present in any of the worlds of manifestation, and that is divine love. So I love this idea. Try to imagine a moment where you have, for instance, you have the Big Bang. You have nothing and suddenly you have everything. The Big Bang. A singularity before that. Then it settles into planets and gases and whatever. You get the 5 elements, Akash, Vayu. Vayu is the moment where life begins to come about. The Veda says, Tvameva pratyaksham brahmasi, namaste Vayu. So Vayu is when things are being formed. Agni is the son of heaven by the body of the earth. So all the hymns in the Veda are to Agni. All these are things I've understood from Aurobindo. I had not understood before that. Aurobindo helps you to understand what is traditional Indian thought also.
Yeah.
Then you get manas, prana, annam, food. The body is called food because it eats and it will be eaten. How logical. Of course, we have worm food, Shakespeare says. There is a moment in this whole evolutionary process where everything is grey and then suddenly flowers burst forth. You get this world of color. And scientifically, it is recognized. What are flowers? They are angiosperms. So suddenly, nature comes up with a process which speeds up the evolutionary process. What is aeonic becomes faster once flowers come. And then Mother tells you that flowers are psychic presences. So they're moments, representation of things that are themselves eternal. So once flowers burst forth, you get the birds and the colors and you get the fishes in the ocean. Unbelievable the shapes and forms that come about. So this is what, even before I found Aurobindo, I'd said, this beautiful world, the purpose is just to abandon it? What kind of perverse creation is this that you have to abandon it? Aurobindo tells you why it is how it is and where it is the spark of the future and where it that belongs to the past. So perhaps what we call evil is something that's no longer in its place. Perhaps. Not all, because how do you explain a phenomenon like Hitler? Not so obvious. So there is something, and I think that comes in with the self-conscious attitude that human beings have, that we consciously choose perversity. We consciously choose the dark side. And I think that's also something that Auroville has to look at. That the moment we turn to yoga, what is yoga? Yoga is harnessing power. The moment you harness power, as long as the ego is there, it will misuse it. And so you link ego and power, you get perversity. And that's where evil comes. Because you do not find a way to define the animal world as evil. Evil seems to be a human manifestation. At least when we become self-aware, self-conscious, we begin to do terrible things because we attach a certain sense of power and control to what we do. So I'm still trying to make sense of all this. It's very hard to understand in our present state of consciousness, what is this darkness that surrounds us, our consciousness. And I'm trying to understand, because Aurobindo is talking about a next step in evolution. We cannot, with the present consciousness, even get a little bit of that, because it would be so dangerous if the ego used it. So when Mother says that Auroville is le berceau du surhomme, the cradle of the next step, there's a great work we have to do before we can create that society. But the fact, so I landed up in Auroville, I didn't choose Auroville. I chose the yoga of Aurobindo. But this yoga of Aurobindo means you have to move your body, you have to move your life, you have to move your mind in a way of self-giving and service, because that's the only way you grow. You're not doing what you're doing to serve somebody else. You're doing it to develop your own consciousness. Everything you do contributes towards your own growth of consciousness, and that's the offering you can make. A consciousness that grows.
Right. I want to also come back to the three principles of education, and that, your journey with integral education as that began, that ultimately also shaped last school in many ways. But before I come there, since we have gone now in this direction, Sri Aurobindo's quotation, all life is yoga. Then yoga is practical psychology. And many times when people come to integral yoga, there's not one particular practice. In fact, I've met people who come to Auroville and they think that everybody must be going to Matri Mandir every day. And they're surprised. Oh, you don't go Matri Mandir every day? It's not compulsory. How are you a sadhak? So when there is no particular standard technique that everybody has to follow, no particular pranayama, no particular, sadhana per se, then what is integral yoga and how is it practical psychology? I know I'm asking many sub questions, but one last. And how is it all life as yoga? Because there is this other dimension also that I have seen, that when people say all life is yoga, then it becomes about social work. So what is the yogic element there when we are saying all life as yoga? So if you can share a little bit from your lived experience of being on this journey for the last 50 plus years or more, what is integral yoga? How do you live it? How do you practice it? How do you walk on this path? What do you do on a daily basis that makes you walk on this path?
So one of the things that both Sri Aurobindo and Mother insist upon is freedom of self-finding. And that self-finding implies even the freedom to discover the path towards that self-finding. If you look at the history of the ashram, it's 100 years. It's interesting. They're going to celebrate 100 years of the ashram because there's no official founding date, but let's say when Sri Aurobindo withdrew and the Mother was put in front, 1926, 24th of November, is kind of the day when the ashram officially starts. Then around the Mother, the energies and so I think people forget how much, it's not in your question, but I want to say that people forget how important, how crucial is Mother's action in the manifestation of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. She is the yoga in manifestation. So Sri Aurobindo withdraws from 1926 to 1950. He doesn't come out of his room. So what is he doing is a question we should ask. I mean, he comes in 1910, he leaves in 1950, so that's about 40 years. But there's that period where he's just in his room and Mother is energizing everything that's happening around him because people are gathering. In the 30s, it's very strict. People who come to the ashram, even meeting somebody else for tea could be an interference and an issue in the individual growth of consciousness. So something takes place in the 30s which changes in the 40s. So if this yoga is evolutionary in nature, one of the things that Sri Aurobindo says is it's always that consciousness that's acting, we are not choosing. That consciousness creates the conditions. And what is that consciousness? The universal manifestation in progress. There is a presiding consciousness that creates this evolutionary process. So if you look at the work that Sri Aurobindo and Mother do, it slowly begins to expand. Then when the war happens, suddenly there's an inrush of people. And the laws of the yoga change because now there are people there who may not have come for the yoga, but who create the possibility of life.
Right.
So that those who are doing the yoga are confronting universal life. Because if this yoga has to succeed, it cannot be something that takes place in isolation. It has to succeed with universal life. So even if somebody has made great progress, that progress is held back in manifestation, not inwardly, in manifest, which is why people have chosen to withdraw. Because to change material life has been impossible. We can see in Aurobindo's yoga also, it's so hard to change material life and the way it's functioning. But Aurobindo and Mother have always responded to what life gave them. And life gave them the people it gave them. Yes, initially they would decide, yes, we accept you, no, we don't. Even in the early years of Auroville, Mother would accept people. And the people in the ashram couldn't understand the people she accepted. Because outwardly they didn't seem to be doing any yoga at all. But Mother chose them because of their, whatever that inner psychic aspiration. Even the person who made that urn, I mean, he's smoking and they're going to complain to Mother because it's against the laws of the ashram that you smoke. And this guy is smoking and making the urn. She says, no, I like him. So the type of people who are coming are outwardly appearing to be not doing any kind of yoga, but there is that fire within which Mother has accepted to create that world. So in some ways, freedom, fundamental, absolute freedom to make conscious choices is a given in this yoga. What makes a person acceptable or not, I don't know. It's very puzzling. But once they're inside that whatever circle, then they have to choose to progress. And if they choose not to progress, and if they choose to go the other way towards the darkness, we are stuck with the problem. So I remember even Karan Singh used to say, there's no spirituality in Auroville. Nobody has any practice. You should find some sort of a practice, but you should find it. Nobody gives it to you. Nobody tells you what to do. Because that's how society has functioned. You've always been told, and then you're put in a box and you function in the box. What if everything is removed? Do you go for a higher and a truer life? That is the experiment of Auroville, that everybody chooses some. Now, which part of their being chooses? Because that's the other thing. We are not aligned and harmonized to the source of our being. One part of us chooses, the other part resists. You come to Auroville and the pressure of circumstances, that resistant part is the one that's going to dominate. That's the part that needs to change. So what we see in Auroville is beings in process. And sometimes they seem to be going backwards rather than forwards. But perhaps that journey, how far back do you go? Back, I mean, into the lower side of manifestation, until you say, oh my God, I'm here for something else. And then you leap into the future. So that sense of progress, Mother says, are invited to Auroville all those who thirst for progress and seek this adventure. And in this adventure, we're not going to do what others have done, because you're invited to start this adventure beyond that scale. We are going to be walking a kind of on a virgin pathway as a conscious collectivity. Never has it been tried. Because if you look at all the conscious collectivities in the world, they have been monastic. They have withdrawn from life. They have kept out all the elements that don't fit. In Auroville, everything has to come. No exclusivity. She says humanity has failed because of exclusivity. I want all the extremes to be present. This and that, not this or that. So that is where we are.
Now that we are stumbling upon Auroville also, and I wanted to catch the integral education thread also, we'll try to conclude it with and then we'll go to integral education and Auroville as a whole. If you had to give a message to, let us say, I'm a 35-year-old working in a company in Bangalore, and I am very inspired by Sri Aurobindo's yoga. I somehow stumbled upon it, and I too feel that spirituality is not about abandonment, it is about transformation. And I'm totally convinced that I don't know how to get started. What are some of the steps that I take in order to get started? Is it beginning with reading? Or what do I do? I really want to live it, but I sometimes find reading Aurobindo difficult because, it can sometimes feel difficult. And I'm having a family life also. Do I leave everything and come to Auroville? How do you recommend that I begin?
So there is this wonderful conversation that mother has with Nata. No, it's not Nata, it's Udar. Udar. He says, how do I know I'm in the yoga? And she says that at every moment, you have to remember. You're brushing your teeth and you're offering that. You are walking on the road and you're offering that. You're sweeping the floor and you're offering that. There is no high work, there is no low work. There is work that is offered. So the key is to never forget, to always remember. It's very easy to remember when you're sitting in meditation.
I'm going to probe you a little bit more, because when in the very beginning I had come, my mentors also told me exactly this, remember and offer, gave me a reading also. But very honestly, I used to want to remember what? And that is a very honest follow-up question that may come, that now it took me a whole lot of time to figure out, that's what is meant by remembering the mother. But if you had to tell a beginner, complete beginner who's fascinated, what is that person remembering?
If you have an Ishta Devata, you could turn to that. But what you have to remember is you are the divine. Don't forget that. And if you remember that you are the divine, aham brahmasmi, sarvam khalvedam brahmanasti, then at no second should you forget that. I am the divine in manifestation. I am the divine having a bodily experience, having a human experience. If you remember that you're divine, there's a whole bunch of things you cannot do. Because the divine consciousness, will it allow you to speak badly to somebody else? Will the divine consciousness allow you to cheat and lie to yourself? No, the divine consciousness does not permit certain things. So to remember is to remember aham brahmasmi. That's what Swami Vivekananda says. Tell a child, the true education is, you are that. And then when the child does something that doesn't quite match what thatness is, you say, really? But you are that. You don't criticize the other side. You remind the child, remember, you are that. That's the whole lesson of Indian thought. Aham brahmasmi. And that has come down to us from the most ancient ages.
And what if that makes you a little egoistic? You begin to think I, meaning exactly. I, the ego.
But that's, the Veda has these stories. There's Indra and Virochana. They're told the same thing and Virochana says, and then you throw your weight around all over the world. Luckily, most of us have small weight. So we don't make too much of damage. But when you are a Rakshasa or an Asura, then you can rampage over the world. We have hundreds of stories of these Rakshasas and Asuras who, when they are done, when they're destroyed by the divine, they return to the divine. So even that is the divine. But experiencing the perversity of the other side. So when we say that everything is the divine, we are not creating a devil. We are recognizing that some people are exploring the dark side, the ecstasy of the dark side. So Mother has a question in the agenda, which I found very, very interesting. She says she can accept unconsciousness, she can accept bad behavior, but she has a kind of a movement against cruelty. She has difficulty with cruelty. So she's looking at the question, why is cruelty allowed to exist? And if you notice, cruelty comes with the human consciousness. Why are human beings so miserably cruel?
Right.
So there is a message, she says, the world is full of pitiable miseries, but they are most to be pitied, who are so small and so weak that they cannot avoid being nasty. So suddenly you notice that nastiness and cruelty and meanness is measured against smallness. But why? Because Mother says there is a kind of a perverse ananda that cruel people get when they are cruel, when they are hurtful. And that sanctions the right for cruelty to exist. Because ananda is the basis of creation. And anything that brings you that kind of delight, and we are the only creature on earth that delights in being nasty. And that's what sanctions it. So when we are looking at falsehood and evil, even present in Auroville, we have to look at what sanctions it.
Right. But I want you to again come back. You were on the remember and offer, and then I sort of cut you off into this direction. But I want you to share a little bit more to that seeker who is just starting out and wants to practice. So you're saying on a daily basis, whether you're brushing your teeth, you're waking up. Your waking up can be drowsy. Your waking up can be with a sense of joy and remembrance and lightness. So in every aspect of life, one can remember to begin with a deeper, finer, higher way of expression. If you can illustrate that a little bit more.
So one of the most powerful means is japa. So if you're in your silly, mechanical, unconscious self, we all have that. The way to lift it up is to repeat. And this is something that is there all over India. There are beings, the story of Valmiki. He's not Valmiki, he's called Valmiki because he comes out of the anthill. But before that, he's a thief. And he runs into the Sapta Rishis and they say, why are you doing this? And he says, because I have to feed my family. And they say, well, are they going to take the karma of this bad behavior of yours? Go and find out. So they'll wait. He says, you wait. And he goes to his wife and child. And they say, no, it's you who's doing it. Why should we take the karma? And he's totally shocked. He comes back and he says, they are not ready to take. Why am I doing this? So he sits down and they tell him to say, mara, 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 mara. And so he sits down and he begins to say, mara, 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 mara. And it slowly becomes Rama.
Oh.
And that's Valmiki. And then he emerges out of the anthill as a rishi.
Wow.
And he's the Adi Kavi because he composes the Ramayana.
Right.
If you actually look at a lot of these stories and you read them in another way,
Right.
even the biblical story of the banishment from paradise, the way Mother explains it, you say, okay, it falls into place. It's interpretation. So japa is a very powerful way for the body to become aligned.
Right.
Ideally, we should say the japa consciously, but we can start to say it unconsciously. The body gets into the rhythm of saying it. It's a pattern, it's a meter, it arranges your life.
Right.
So it could be just that. Rather than think difficult things,
Right.
think the mantra
Right.
before you start embodying it.
Right.
And it has an effect on the body. Mother says it works on the body also.
Right. Right. I have a lot more questions to ask, but I will go back to the 3 principles of integral education. And if you can weave in how you came to integral education and how that translated into also your life's work and the building of the last school, a school without certificates, really one of the places that embodies one of the lines which is there, I think, in the Auroville dream, that education would be given not for passing examinations and degrees, but for enriching existing faculties and building new ones while bringing out the soul. So what has that journey been like? So first, of how you received integral education, And then what has it meant to create a container, to create a context which can offer integral education to the youth, to the other 17-year-olds?
Okay. So I landed in teaching by chance. I don't see myself as a teacher. It's something I do, and it seems to be very useful because it helps me to discover truths about myself when I'm doing it. Often I find, for the first 10 years I was in Auroville, I was doing a whole lot of other things. We founded the first commercial trust of Auroville, Artisana Trust. We were the first trustees. I ran the boutique, La Boutique d'Auroville. I ran it for a few years. So I was doing all sorts of other things. They needed a teacher at some point in time. And as I'm sort of interested in language and literature and poetry, it seems to be a natural inclination. They needed a teacher for this, and people said, "Why don't you teach?" So I slipped in.
Prior to that, you mentioned that you didn't go to the ashram school. It was good, and freedom is important. And the first principle being nothing can be taught. I want you to take that thread and then I fast forward it to here.
I had people telling me that, why are you not going to study further? Go, you could get a PhD, you could do... I said, no. I would come to the Samadhi and put my head at the Samadhi and say to Shobinda and Mother, I do want to develop my mind, but I want you to develop it. So I'm the first practitioner of free progress in my own life because I've constantly read. I've always been reading, exploring, searching for meaning.
And sort of your reading of Mother's works, which you were doing with the
I started there.
That kind of became an education.
Everything was an education, everything. Savitri has been the best education. But I started to teach, and then when I was doing that, I come from a family which has been very organized and structured, and I said, they don't have a library, we need a library. So actually, books were coming and they were just being taken home, and I was, no way. We created the first lending library of Auroville. We printed lending cards. We would not let people take books away. So without, a time when they were going to return it. The other day, it was 40 years since I started to teach, so a whole bunch of my old-time connections came. So Tashi was my first librarian, and so I pulled her in, and we were learning on the job. I don't know library science, but it was something, even if you don't know something, you can learn it.
Right.
What's wrong? Just learn it. You have the capacity. So we were doing these borrowing cards, lending cards, we were making catalogs, and anyway, so then I noticed that the school needed other organizations, so I ended up getting pulled into it. I stayed there. I got more and more involved with different aspects of the educational process, timetables, everything. I have found in my life that it's always much easier to know what you cannot do than what you should do. And sometimes to find the pathway to doing, you remove all the things that you will not do. So when Mother says that utilitarianism is a disease that I do not want in the ashram, she's talking about the ashram school, and then she says this pursuit of success, career and money is the problem of education. We have to make yoga education. She says that to the Education Commission that comes to Auroville, comes to Pondicherry and the ashram in the 60s. So all these words have been the ones, okay, that, not this. So it was clear for me that if I was going to teach, I was going to teach in the free progress way, because Mother wants that to be, not because I know what that means. And I would say that you cannot do anything in Auroville without a team. So luckily for me, there have been wonderful people with whom we have kept this place alive. There was a moment, and there was not just one moment, there were many moments where it was announced that free progress is dead. And even the economy group wanted to shut us down. That law school is not justified. Everybody wants to go for certificate education. I even understand why they want to do that, because the kids are saying, stop experimenting upon us. No, let us be secure and safe. Parents are saying the same thing. The crisis comes at about the age of 13. where suddenly you say, what is my future going to be? Now, I've been crying as a voice in the wilderness. Everyone has a future. Everyone comes with a destiny. It's not the paper that's going to. Who has ever asked me for any papers? No, so I keep saying that, but you have to trust that. You have to trust the universe that you will find the way to go. So I would say to all young seekers, the first thing that is needed is trust that you come, you are the divine in manifestation, you come with a destiny. And that destiny, the purpose of it is to find the divine in manifestation. You can take 1,000 lives, or you can compress it by yoga into a much shorter space of time. Now, the children are not expected to be doing yoga. But you can create a kind of a condition whereby the question arises. So Mother calls free progress and education guided by the soul, but not subject to habits, conventions, and preconceived ideas. So one of the things we keep alive is, what is a habit? What is a convention? What is a preconceived idea? These are the three things that take you away from the guidance of the soul. The soul is something secret and hidden. Nobody can go directly to the soul, but you can create conditions. So, and those conditions are there in Sri Aurobindo's 3 principles. Nothing can be taught, the mind must be consulted, and you go from the near to the far. And he elaborates it beautifully. So if you try to practice, and it's nothing to do with education alone, it's to do with life and how you live it. That you cannot be taught anything. So yoga cannot be taught. It has to emerge from this fire, mystic fire that is burning in the heart. And that, I think, is the key. Enthusiasm in Greek means to be filled with the God energy.
Wow.
Theos is God, entheos, that is you're filled. So enthusiasm coupled with gratitude, that you've come across all these marvelous, magical ideas. Sri Aurobindo says all's miracle here and can by miracle change. And for me, that's the key, that at any moment, just like Valmiki becomes Valmiki, at any moment, anybody can become that. And that's the hope of the future. Because we are divine in manifestation.
I'm going to come to a very practical question that I'm assuming some parts of the audience members may be having at the back of their mind. I have a child. I really want to practice Sri Aurobindo's yoga. I want it for my child as well. But I'm insecure and fearful. You're saying no utilitarian goals like money. But how will my child, and I'm sure throughout the last 50 years of holding last school, you've had parents come up with these insecurities that, like you were saying that, but how can, even for me, like the first time I had come to Auroville, I had met a young guy who opted out of school, even though he was getting like a great mark in 11th standard and did not complete even 12th standard, and he came to Auroville and he was saying, I've come here to build a new world. And in my head, I was like, as a parent, I will at least tell my child, bachelor's you complete, after that you do whatever. So I couldn't be like, he didn't even complete 12th. And I was feeling protective of him. And I'm sure as parents that, not having a certificate, not having a degree, and will that mean the child will sort of fall back into like what you were saying, habits, or just do nothing? So how do you, first as a parent, hold space for an education which is based on free progress? Because these fears are likely to come.
True. I must say that I have a wonderful inheritance, because I never had my parents tell me anything but, we trust you. you will find yourself.
Right.
And it was, what they said was, you will find yourself. They were not telling me I have to get a career, I have to, though it was assumed that my father had 4 daughters, it was assumed that we would all have work. We are not going to become housewives and sit at home. There was never any question of that. My mother worked all her life. They worked all those years in the army, and then they came to Auroville and they worked till their 90s in Auroville too. But I have a feeling parents should never put fear into the child. What they should say is, we value and we trust the truth of your consciousness. You will find a way. And when parents do that, when they don't bring fear into the equation, magical things take place. And I've seen that literally.
And that would mean even if the child wants to, say, pursue money as an aim, you allow that to happen?
You could give the feedback that, really, is that a value for you? You could give stories, you could give... I think it's a very flat value to chase money. And this is what I'm hearing. Many people are now in India afraid that they won't have enough money. I grew up in a family which never valued money. There was never any money. I mean, the army salary was ridiculous. But we were surrounded by love and caring. Money has no value. It doesn't bring love. So, what is your value system? What are you? The kids will imitate you. Not what you say, but what you are. So be careful what your value systems are, because that's what you're giving your child.
Right.
And if your value system is trust in the divinity within, the child will. Even if it appears to be lost, it'll find its way. Because I think the greatest gift my father gave, he came from a traditional background. My mom was much more liberated in that sense. When I was lost, he would say, I trust. You'll be fine. So when I didn't have trust in myself, my father had trust in me. And that helped. It's because you have to figure things out. So there was a period where, I knew I wanted to come to the ashram. I knew all the things I didn't want to do. But I hadn't made a choice. And then they were like, solid support.
Because you touched money, I want to also come to Sri Aurobillo's take on money, because I find it very, very path-breaking. I even found it quite amazing that in that little booklet, the mother, one entire chapter on money. And 1 or 2 conversations I remember reading from Chachaji's book, Surendranath Jauhar, in which, in one of the stories, and I'm not quoting verbatim, but roughly something like this is presented, where he goes to the mother and says that, mother, business is taking me away from my psychic being. And mother said, okay, you don't run it, I will. And she actually takes it over. And she's like, okay, I'll manage it with your son. And after that, obviously, he's feeling left out because the 2 of them are now into shaping of the business. And when I first read it, I was like, this is a spiritual figure. And a sadhak of the ashram comes to her, says that this money and business is taking me away from the soul. And she says, okay, fine, I'll do it. Right? And you have Sri Aurobindo and the mother writing about how this force has to be brought for the divine. And also, at that time, ashram having businesses or having anything to do with money itself, an ashram and money usually doesn't meet, doesn't go together. And in the very early years of us building Purnam also, I also used to keep money to the side because I was really trying to protect a certain purity. I somehow felt that if money will come in, it will become impure. And at some point in time, we also realized that while money is not a goal, it is a means. And if we are building a team and we have to sustain that team, we need money to feed them. So that's when again went back to the works of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, went back to that chapter on money, Because the first time when I read it, I thought they are writing for somebody else. I didn't think they were writing for me. And that's why some big industrialists, businessmen, they have to conquer it and bring it for Sri Aurobindo and the mother. I never associated myself anything to do with enterprise, business, money. Some people will do it. They're writing for them. And it's only when we entered a money crisis that we were like, oh, what had they written? Let's go back. And for the first time I read that chapter and I felt like they're talking to me. And so anyway, within this context, because I don't want people to also misunderstand that, it's that spirituality, just like abandonment of life. You abandon, that traditional spirituality many times is like, no sex, no money, no relationships, no children, no colors. So it's like neti. You focus only on, it's not that. It has to embrace that dimension also and transform. So if you can share a little bit on Sri Aurobindo's take on money, and also some case studies, some examples from the last school who did not chase money. But it's not like they are living a poor life. Not at all. In fact, mother takes care of you. And I myself know several examples from the last school did not have certifications. On the basis of the portfolio, got one of the best opportunities to study further or to learn further. So if you can share a little bit on that framework also, that will also really help.
So it's hard to make a generalization because it's always individual cases and everyone has an individual journey to make, which is so unique that you cannot make it an example. There's a letter of Sri Aurobindo where he says, what's wrong with doing business? I would have done it.
Right.
If he sees himself as a poet and a politician, not as a, but he absolutely values the princes of industry. We had in the early years of Auroville this wonderful industrialist, J.R.D. Tata. Now, if you look at the example of this man, even in an Indian context, that is an interesting example because there are people who have what mother calls the money taint. They are possessed by money rather than the possessors of money. But there are those who are free. And absolutely, this work of the divine needs money to be generated. That's why she made an industrial zone. Presently, I'm a little troubled by the way there is so much of control being exercised over the poor people who are trying to generate money. And there's a suspicion and there is almost an insulting suspicion that is imposed because so many of my friends have run some of the most extraordinary money-generating units in Auroville. And it's thanks to those contributions that Auroville keeps thriving. We are not creating a sufficiently supportive environment for this to happen. Now, once people possess money, there can be trouble because money has an issue with taking possession of you rather than you possessing it. But that's a journey that has to be made. Mother's children have to do it to the best of their ability. So yes, that's one of the most wonderful things about the ashram. There have been all these units but nobody ever owned them.
Right.
So how to... the people who are running units in Auroville are suffering so much because of this non-ownership. So who owns it? Is it the office that runs Auroville right now? No, it's the mother.
Right.
But the office is behaving as if it owns the business.
Like a landlord.
And not allowing anyone the freedom to exercise. That's, I would say, a wrong use. So there is a message where mother writes, you take measures against honest people and you let the rascals get away with everything. She's writing it down because she's telling Satprim, when I write it down, it sits there and it does its work. So to take measures against honest people, I find that so foolish. Because Auroville has an industrial zone. Auroville should help people to develop. I personally have not had much contact with this field, though I did run a boutique for 2-3 years.
Right. And I think now we can come to, I know throughout the conversation you've referred to Auroville multiple times. If you had to introduce Auroville to somebody who doesn't know what is Auroville, why is it important? And maybe has heard about Auroville or that little place with the golden globe. Now Matrimony is a part of the temple tour also. So probably has heard about Auroville in that context, but doesn't really know what is Auroville. How would you introduce Auroville? What is Auroville? Why is it important? Can a bunch of, right now, 3,000 permanent residents, okay, eventually 50,000, can a bunch of, even 50,000 is a speck in the entire humanity, in the entire universe. How can that make a difference on the face of the earth? Is it really important? Is it really relevant? What is Auroville and why is it relevant?
So on different planes. On the historical plane, if you look at psychological historical, it's never been the many that brought about change. It's always been the few. If you look at history, so much gets lost, but it's the few that make the change. 1. 2, I don't think it's a question of numbers. Nothing depends on the numbers. The fact that a group of people with no selection, people who've come from every corner of the world, from whatever background, have come together and turned what is a desertified plateau 58 years ago into this oasis of green, in spite of themselves, because there has been quarrels in Auroville from the beginning, but almost in spite of us, so much of working together in a kind of a fraternity of collaboration has taken place. There is no other experiment on earth of this kind. Intentional communities have been there, but they've always been in a limited frame and they've never lasted too long. Right? Either they are monastic and then they are isolated, or in recent times there have been many intentional communities that have been oriented towards ecology or architecture or some such thing. But Auroville, everything. There is no exclusion of any possibility. But can we come together? Then Aurobindo says, Mother says, that the work they have done, the work of consciousness is done. Now the work of manifestation must take place. This thing that they have created of a next step in evolution, it's there. It has to be brought into the material world, into manifestation. Necessarily, it needs a collectivity, a fraternity that collaborates. But fraternity, brotherhood, cannot be created by social or political devices. So your question about meditating together, that's a device. It has to happen spontaneously, that people come together and invoke in silence or something. It's not as if Mother is very interested in this kind of collective aspiration, but you cannot make it happen with any kind of device. There's a tendency these days to make things happen and they become fake to start with. You have to be integrally authentic to create this. And when I see that brotherhood is something that comes from the soul, it's not something that you can do outwardly. I mean, we've experimented with liberty, we've experimented with equality, the world, governments, countries, nations have tried these. Who has tried fraternity? Who has tried brotherhood? So here are people who don't choose each other, who land together because hopefully their souls have brought them here. It's unique. But not everybody is supposed to come and live in Auroville. It's a tiny little place in a tiny little corner of rural South India. But I must say that for me, I didn't choose Auroville. I chose Aurobindo and the Mother. there is no alternative to trying this experiment.
Why do you say
else?
so?
Huh?
Why do you say so?
There is no other. Where in the world would I find such a collectivity? So necessarily, it's unique.
Right.
And it's 58 years old. And I run into people. We may be very different outwardly, but there is this something that binds, tie that holds us together, that brotherhood. When people meet each other outside of Auroville, they suddenly discover how much a brotherhood exists. Within Auroville, there are quarrels. I think that Aurovillians have to learn not to do certain things to each other. That we haven't learned as a collectivity. It's not as if in the present last 5 years, only bad things have been done. Even before, there has been inexcusable behavior which doesn't fit with the brotherhood. But we have to learn. And sometimes we learn through our mistakes. But it's unique.
Right. I have a few questions. I'll give you a couple of mothers' quotations, not verbatim, roughly. One where she calls Auroville the cradle of the Superman, the superhuman. What does that mean? That is question number one. Second, at one place I read, she says, Auroville will be more powerful than the sum of all the groups in the world combined. And I was startled. I said, this is...
No, she's talking about weapons. So she has these three revelations. From the her early life, she dreamed of creating a society which was dedicated towards creating a higher and a truer life. Then she says, she talks of Auroville as an old formation. It returns to her consciousness more or less in 1964-65. And then she says it's returned. And then she begins to have certain revelations. So for me, there are three great revelations she has, which she says are given to her by Aurobindo. One, that humanity is amassing weapons of mass destruction, and that's so dangerous because the moment you create something, you create with it its own power of realization. When you create something, even if it's a material thing, it has inbuilt into it a power to realize itself. So she says it's dangerous. Weapons of mass destruction are dangerous. This is at the time when everyone was afraid of a nuclear war, etc. Have we ever wondered how miraculous it is that none of these weapons have been reused after 1945? There's a kind of a grace. There is a divine love and a grace that's protected us from ourselves. That's an aside. So the first revelation is that Auroville, the aim of Auroville is peace upon earth. It's an effective human unity. It's to counteract the action of this error that all the countries of the world, which they're still doing, massive money being spent on weaponry even today in the world. A problem. It's a problem. The money could be spent to make things easier. But there's so much of fear in the world. Then in 68, when Auroville is more or less just going to be founded, she has another revelation where she says India has become a concentration of all the difficulties of humanity. And that's why she's made Auroville. That Auroville will find solutions. So the next revelation is we are tied to the future of India. Why are we not offering more solutions to India? I mean, we have, in a sense, Auroville is the place where the Organic Farmers Association was born. I think Auroville is a center for permaculture. On the environmental work, windmills, everything, Auroville is known. People working in this field, they know. We did well with the land. We did well with the environment. What we haven't yet succeeded in doing well with is economy, governance, to some extent, even education. So we have to find solutions. We have to demonstrate in a little laboratory possibilities that other people can look and catch. So even for people who are interested in Aurobindo and Mother, not everybody has to abandon their life and come here. Wherever they are, they can catch some of those ideas and start to practice them. Practice life affirmation with another spirit, not self-aggrandizing, ego-feeding spirit, but this generosity, of gratitude, of giving back. Because one of the dharmic standards is asteyam, to take without giving is stealing. This is in the Indian dharmic standard. Give, danam. That is what we should do. So if there's enough money in this country now, give. That will change your whole structure of law and order of life. The third revelation takes place in 69, where she talks about le berceau du surhomme. So she says, that's interesting. She herself is surprised that Auroville is a place. So when you start from effective human unity and you arrive at the next step, there's a huge journey that's already taken place. And all of these dreams, aims, possibilities are concentrated in this little...
The phrase that you used, I didn't understand. The 69 phrase?
Le berceau du surhomme?
Yeah, I don't know French.
The cradle?
Yeah, oh, yes, okay.
The cradle. I always prefer to say it in French because
that's how she
surhomme can be translated as above man, as overman, as superman. But we are not speaking about the supramental species. We are speaking about the intermediate being between that and us. Something intermediate could be born in Auroville.
Right.
So she's saying surhomme, not superman.
Right. Actually, since we already stumbled on this, I also have a couple of more questions. But since we already stumbled on this thing, what in Sri Aurobindo's yoga is this idea of, I know it's a full subject, I'm touching a Pandora's box here, of the Superman? What is the idea of the Gnostic being? What is this idea? What does it mean? Is it that, I'm talking in a very rudimentary manner, just like from monkeys we came, from us something else is going to come? What does this mean?
Okay, so Sri Aurobindo's yoga has 3 steps. He talks about a triple transformation. The first step, the step where we are, we haven't made that step yet, is the psychic transformation. We have to bring the souls in front. If we can create a collectivity which is governed both individually and collectively by the soul,
Right.
by the collective soul as well as by the psychic being, the individual soul. That is step 1. That is not rocket science. That is something we can do with our own present consciousness. The second step is contained in this message Mother gives, the last message she gives. Her New Year messages, she says, my New Year messages are when it has to globalize the idea. So the last message is, when you are conscious of the whole world at the same time, then you can be conscious of the divine. Which seems to suggest that the psychic transformation doesn't make you conscious of the divine. It makes you conscious of the inner divinity, the immanent Godhead in you. But the psychic being doesn't know everything. The psychic being is a being of harmony and mutuality and self-giving. It will not do harm the way the ego consciousness does. But it is not aware of the whole world. Only when you universalize. Now, to universalize, there cannot be even a hint of ego. So we are very far from that. Only when the universalization, Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, is what the Isha Upanishad says, that everything is the Lord. And in Book 7, Canto 7, this experience Mother describes of the cosmic spirit, where she disappears. She becomes everything, the flower, the tree. That's universalization. The ego disappears. We haven't achieved that at all. And even for Mother and Sri Aurobindo, it was difficult to be universalized in this present state of consciousness that surrounds them, because it was like everything was coming at them, attacking their bodies a little bit. Only then can we do the next step. So none of us is doing the supramental yoga. We are very, very far from it. Mother, she asked Sri Aurobindo, And she's reading one of Sri Aurobindo's letters. This is in the agenda, and she's telling Satprema. I asked Sri Aurobindo, you expect us to do all this in our bodies? So he laughs and he says, let's talk about it in 300 years. So she says 300 years. Then she tells Satprema, maybe 1,000. Maybe many, many more years. So this is an error we are making in Auroville, where we are looking at things that are far in the future. But the steps have to begin now. Some sort of action, some sort of a collective something like a kavach that could be created in this little corner of rural South India, which would allow those steps to take place. So the longer I have been in this journey, on this journey, the more I realize that we had all kinds of ideas that we would do things very fast. No, it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious. But the gift you get is a sense of well-being on the way. It's not as if you've arrived at any kind of goal. And I've seen so many of the old-time Aurovillians leaving their bodies with the recognition that they're going to have to come back and try again. But imagine if more and more beings were born who were conscious from the beginning. Because this is the worst thing. When you are reborn, it takes you so long to wake up. Can we speed up that? Can we make beings that are conscious from birth, that can start to do yoga from childhood? Because just that's their capacity. So what we have to do is increase spiritual capacity in our present state.
Yeah. I'll now ask the last question. I'm really thankful for your time. Can we ask one more question? Yes. This is a stage in India where there are growing number of entrepreneurs. Even the way there is something called Shark Tank, I don't know if you're aware of. It went viral in India.
What Trump used to do. I know.
But essentially, a lot more Indians in the grassroots, in the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities as well, making organizations, making enterprises, building organizations, building institutes in their own right. And while the commercial side of running a business is often seen and taught, that part is there. But I feel any institution, any organization is also collective. Commerce is just one part of the story. What are some of the lessons that you have from Auroville in terms of building of the collectivity, building of the culture? Like what Auroville appears at the visitor center is only the tip of the iceberg, even not that. There is a lot which goes beneath the scene. And even in your experience of building an institution like Last School, I'm sure most of the time people ask you about education, but that's the front end of the work that you do. I'm sure in putting Last School together, in holding the ground no matter what, in holding the back-end administration, in holding the culture amongst the different teachers, there's a lot of below the iceberg work that goes on, or values that are very consciously held. If you can speak a little bit about what those values, what that culture building, what that collectivity building, and even at a highest level, the building of the collective soul, what does that mean? And how do you, as a person who wants to build a conscious collective in one's own organization, how can that person begin to walk the path?
You know, we don't even have to go to the future. There is so much in India's past that we just have to remember and follow. The yams and the niyams, dharmic standards, the idea of what Sri Aurobindo calls the social triple quartet, the 4 ashramas. It was an idea that was recognized in India that there can be a period where you amass growth of every kind, whether it's families and children or it's money. But by the time you're 50, it's time to give it away. No? You have one prasthan. So from brahmacharya to grihastha to brahmprasthan to one prasthan was enjoined in the social structures. Then purusharth, arth, kam, dharma, moksha. Even Aurobindo's solution for the Chaturvarna is the fourfold order, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi and Mahasaraswati. You awaken all these energies and forces because the mother is energy and force, conscious energy, conscious force. You have to awaken it. We don't have to go very far. We just have to stand by the dharmic standards that India offers to the world. I always feel that there is a remark of Rabindranath Tagore. He says, I love India not because I cultivate the idolatry of geography, but because she has kept alive through countless ages the living word of these sages, these rishis. And absolutely, that is India. So I would say young entrepreneurs in India must practice the Indian dharmic standards. You don't have to look to the future, which means this selfish, self-aggrandizing competitiveness that has come to us from the Occidental world of the last few centuries. We've also got a mind that's capable of making progress that comes to us from the West. So we need those ideas. But we should select. We should take what we need and not take what would harm us. So my dream is if India becomes strong and powerful, and I love India. I mean, for me, it remains a love that transcends even Auroville, that India must, because Aurobindo needs India to be great for his dreams to be realized. But the young of India must practice dharmic standards. And it's all there. It's a given. We just study the yams and the niyams without making a rigidity out of them, but just what is it telling us? What is this culture telling us? People have practiced wealth producing. I read an article, very interesting. New York Times has this article that most of India's giving is not with big entrepreneurs, because some of the big entrepreneurs have become not like J.R.D. Tata. They're building huge self-centered, self-developed housing. But the ordinary people, the amount they give, and that they said most of India's giving is coming from ordinary people. I was so delighted to read that article because for me, that's my sense of India. That the Indian people are not obsessed with this egoistic amassing of wealth. And I want to say that I admire the Aurovillians who have created commercial generating units. It's unbelievable that at the visitor center, none of those units belong to people.
Right.
It's so miraculous. How do we create all this production with no ownership? That's something we've demonstrated to the world. We are now punishing those people, but that's not correct. They have given. So one has to appreciate people who worked in different fields.
I have a lot more questions coming to my mind, but I think we can begin to conclude for now. I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It is always a joy listening to you. You very beautifully illustrated the meaning of the word enthusiasm. And I can really feel that enthusiasm. For me, it's an inspiration to listen from you. We see when I go back to India, when I see women of your age, they are preparing that, I've retired. And many of them are constantly talking about end of life. When I see you, I see a future. I see like such a spark. And that's what yoga does to you. A youth that never ages. A constant progress. So I receive a lot of inspiration from you. And I'm sure the people who've who are going to be watching this podcast as well, they are going to be smitten by your energy. It's such a joy listening to you. Not only because the ideas that you talked about were wonderful, but the space from which you were talking about, that renewed sense of enthusiasm, which I think also Auroville really needs, because Auroville is a very complex place, and I feel also at some level it's a very tough challenge. People from the outside, they think it's a peaceful place, but it is a tough challenge. And people can become, after a certain point in time, losing their enthusiasm. Sort of that becoming old kind of sets in. And I saw that even in my own journey in the last 10 years, making an attempt 1, 2, 3 times, and after the third failure, I was like, and I felt like I was becoming old, but then I looked at Manoj and I was like, he's younger. And I look at Jaya, I'm like, she's young. And I look at you, I'm like, you are young. I was like, how can I become old? This is a crime. I can't do it. Yeah. So it's a lot, very inspiring. So thank you for doing all that you do, for being who you are, and for giving your life to Aurobindo and the mother to a higher, nobler cause.
Thank you. You know that mother started Auroville when she was 90.
Yes.
So we are very young still.
Yeah. There is a quote by her where she says, no,
I'm the youngest.
she says that, it's in your 20s, your energy is dispersed. 30, you start having some orientation. Yeah. 50s is when you discover your life purpose. 80s is when you're in your full potential.
So Jean just turned 80, so we were telling him, now you're there. Now you're ready.
Right.
And he is in some ways, because he's full of enthusiasm too.
Yeah.
Yes, youth is an attitude.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Join us for a 2.5-hour signature masterclass called the Awakening Karmayogi Workshop, where we run you through the fundamental stages of awakening to become a Karmayogi, to be peaceful inside and successful outside. We talk about Swabhava, our true nature, and Swadharma, our soul's purpose, which are the building blocks of a life affirming, not a life negating spirituality. Click on the link below and I shall see you at the workshop.